out to students and talk to people and have this time together. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If I can get my thing up. Okay, awesome. And let me also do that. Okay, fantastic. So today's workshop is writing effective thesis statements. So I come to this as a librarian, but I also have written a whole lot of stuff because in order to be a librarian, you also need to have a master's degree in library science. And so I have written more than my fair share of papers and created more than my fair share of thesis statements. But so that's the context that I bring to the table here. And so because of that, I'm going to focus maybe a little bit on how your thesis statement ties into your research and doing your academic research, because that's kind of my stock and trade as a librarian. I answer research or help people with their research all day long. But I feel like since that is part of the continuum of, you have your paper, you have a topic, and now you need to move it through the research process. I think that getting a good thesis statement, getting a good research question is very much part of that process and part of the research process. And so I am happy to step up to the plate and give you some tips on how to think about thesis statements and how to make really good ones. So I just a little housekeeping note for today. I am going to be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and post them. Let me make sure I can see my chat window. There we go. So chat window, I have it open. So if you have questions as I'm talking, I will also pause and let people verbalize their questions if you are a verbal question asker. So you just need to hang on, or you can also raise your hand in the Zoom function. So yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Oh, and actually, sorry, take that back. The contact info on the screen is for your DVC librarians. We all share duties as far as asking questions. That's not my direct information, but if you have more questions after this workshop, your librarians are standing by waiting for your questions. So we, not a lot of people know this because they sort of creep up to my desk when I'm there and they're like, I'm so sorry to bother you. And I'm like, my job is to be bothered. I'm here to be asked questions. So, don't ever feel like you're interrupting my work. I keep myself busy, but when I'm on duty at the reference desk in the library, my whole job is to be asked questions. So that's what I'm there for. So your librarians are here to help, here to be asked questions. And today is no exception. So if you have them, please speak up or, type up or wait until I pause. So with my question for you starting out is, before we talk about, anything related to thesis statements, when do you think is the right time to write your thesis statement in the process of writing your paper? Do you think it's better to write your thesis statement before you do your research, during your research process, or after you do your research? I would love to know. So you can respond in the chat or you can, unmute yourself. I'm curious what people think and why. I've got one response so far. I know I've got more participants in this meeting. I know there's at least 10 of you, so I'd love to know. A lot of people, okay. During, after, before, after, okay. Getting a variety of answers. Draft during or finalized after. Okay, I like that answer. So it's a bit of a trick question because, okay, so this is my opinion. You might have a different sense of it, or you might have been told differently by English instructors. And honestly, everything I say is superseded by what your instructor says. But in my experience in doing research, you don't know what you don't know yet. So if you are starting out embarking on a topic that you've never interacted with before and you don't know anything about, how are you going to know what you don't know and what you do know? So it's really hard to know what you don't know when you're starting out learning about something. That's, because writing a research paper is at the very core of it, it's about learning. It's learning about something. So if you don't know enough about it to make a educated guess or make some good assumptions or create an argument about it, you're not going to be able to write a really good thesis statement until after you've done at least some research. So really the answer is somewhere between B and C. You can kind of project and have a draft, but you don't want to be super stuck on it. So I like that. I actually really like the answer of draft during and finalized after. So this was a little bit of a trick question. Hope you forgive me, but I feel like when I'm helping students at the library, the big no-no that I run into, and it's actually kind of frightening to me how students think that this is okay, but they're like, I wrote my whole paper and now I need my sources to prove what I'm saying. And I'm like, excuse me, wait, you didn't research first? So now I have to like fit what you said to the sources? That's not how it works, Cupcake. Like it's, you need to know a little bit about your topic and what other people have said about your topic before you can actually like work that into your research. That's what research is about, is you need to learn about your stuff and then you can write good stuff about it. So I have a video that says this a little bit better than I do, and I'm going to try to get it to play for all of you. Let me switch to my share. There we go. Okay, we'll do like that. We'll do full screen. Okay, thumbs up if
Meet Jenny.
you can hear the video.
Jenny has a research project due in a few days. She picked a topic when her professor first assigned the project.
Okay, thank you.
She chose her favorite TV show, Bridezillas. It seemed like a good idea, but now that she's doing her research, she's having a lot of trouble finding sources. She's freaking out. Jenny's problem started with her mental model of the research process, which she sees as a one-way street. Like many students, Jenny thinks that once a project is assigned, she should pick her topic right away. Then she can move on to finding sources and reading through them, and once she has all her sources, she can start writing her paper. But the research process is a lot messier than that, and picking your topic is intertwined with finding and reading sources, and writing and editing your paper. Picking your topic is research. When you first pick a research topic, it isn't set in stone. It's just an idea that you test with some exploratory research. If it looks good, you find and read some more sources. At this point, you might find that the published research leads you away from your original topic. That's okay. You can let the research you find guide you and tweak your topic a bit. And by the time you've gone through this cycle a few times, you may find that you have enough sources to start writing and editing your paper. Even then, as you're writing, you may find that you need to pull in additional pieces of information, and you may return to the research cycle. So, let's wind back the clock for Jenny, bringing her back to the day her professor assigned this project, and allow her to do it again with this research model. Again, Jenny picks a topic that is interesting to her, the reality TV show Bridezillas. As she tests the topic with some internet research and in article databases, she discovers that there is lots written about it in the popular press, but not much scholarly research which her professor requires. Realizing that maybe her topic is a bit too narrowly defined, Jenny decides to tweak it by broadening her scope to reality TV in general. But when she tests this new topic, she winds up drowning in a sea of research, all of which has to do with reality TV, but doesn't tie together to help her form a coherent thesis. Back at the drawing board, she wonders if there's a happy medium between Bridezillas, which is too narrow a topic, and reality TV, which is too broad. Since Bridezillas is just one of several reality TV shows about brides and weddings, perhaps there's more written about this subgenre. Testing this topic in some of the library's research databases yields a promising but not overwhelming number of results. Instead of realizing too late that her topic was unresearchable, Jenny built in the time to test and tweak her topic, so she could take her original idea and shape it into a topic that she still finds interesting and can realistically use for a short research assignment. If you want to know more about the research process or about how to pick a good topic, ask a librarian for help.
Ask a librarian. All right. So, long story short, the research process is not linear. And so you often, as you are, working on your paper, as you're figuring things out, as you're testing different thesis statements, you may actually want to revise your thinking and revise your argument and tweak your topic and tweak what you're thinking about. And that's actually part of the writing process. That's part of writing research papers, is that, because you don't know what you don't know starting out. And so for you to think, I know a lot of composition classes, when you sit down, like you have to turn in a thesis and you have to turn in an outline before you're actually starting writing the paper. And that's part of the process, but you're not stuck with that. I think most professors will say, you don't have to stick with this thesis that you're turning in. You just need something to work with. You need something to start with. And then as you go along the process, as you go down the path of research, finding stuff, I like to call this, when I'm teaching for library classes, I like to call it, I call it the Goldilocks problem. So it's a question of scope. So when you have too broad a topic, you have entirely too many sources, you have way too much happening, and there's no way that you can connect all the sources together unless you're writing an entire dissertation or a whole book on this topic. So that tells me that you need to narrow down your topic, but sometimes you pick a topic that's way too narrow. And so making sure that you're finding out that, it's like the fairy tale of Goldilocks, like something that's not too big, something that's not too small, but something that's just right. And it's kind of hard to know what that is until you actually start searching. You start looking around, you look on the internet, you look in the library's databases, and that finds out, then you figure out like how big is the pool of knowledge on this area, on this topic? Is it enormous or is it really small? So, narrowing down is almost always a good idea, because you're actually going to do yourself a lot of favors. So I would like to clarify some terms in the research paper process. There is a big difference between a report and a research paper. And up until now, if you're coming to DVC from either high school or you've been out of school for a while, maybe you've probably written a lot of reports so far in your academic life. You may not have written as many research papers. So, reports require research, but they're not necessarily a research paper, because what the difference is whether or not you are actually weighing in with your original thought, with your argument, with the framing that you are putting onto your topic and the way that you are talking about it. So you're pulling all this stuff together and you're saying, well, here's how these things connect, and here is what I am going to demonstrate in this paper. Here's what I am going to prove in this paper. And so you're building yourself an argument. And at the core of it, your thesis statement is that nugget of your main idea of your argument. And so that's why it's such a big deal. And that's why every paper should always have a thesis statement, because you need to be able, it's like the elevator pitch. It's like the movie trailer. What is it you're trying to say in one sentence? What's the whole point of this entire paper that you're writing? And what that looks like. So difference between report and research. And I'm going to do a few more definitions. So your topic of your paper is kind of that general theme. It's that big picture umbrella, like I'm going to write a paper about blah in 2 or 3 words. Not every instructor asks you for this, but many of them will ask you to create a research question. When I teach library skills class in doing research, I always have my students write a research question. And what that does is it's a question you can ask that will guide your research, and it includes all of those concepts of your topic in the form of a question. And the thesis statement is kind of the other side of that coin. So it's the answer to your research question, and it clarifies the assertion or the argument that you are supporting in your paper. And when you write a research paper, a college level research paper, at the heart of it, a way to think about this is that you are presenting an argument to your reader. So you now, writing your research paper, are the star of a courtroom TV drama. Okay, you are the prosecutor, or you are the defendant, the defense counsel. You are now the lawyer who is arguing on behalf of your client, and you're saying, well, of course, my client is not guilty because of all of these reasons, and here is the evidence that I am presenting to argue this case. So I am presenting evidence, which PS is the research that you're doing. So all of your sources, all of your quotations, those are the evidence that you are presenting to back up that argument. And when you're in the context of a courtroom, the thesis is always guilty or not guilty. So it's very simple in the courtroom. It's either they did the crime or they did not do the crime. When you're talking about the domain of research papers, it's way more complicated because there's all different kinds of things you can argue. There's all different kinds of things up for debate. What is the truth? What do we know? What is the most important thing? What is the least important thing, etc. So, when at all times when you are writing your research paper, think about how does what I'm saying support my case, support my argument? Because you are now that lawyer in the courtroom drama, arguing your point, arguing your thesis, arguing what it is that you're trying to say in your point, in your paper. Okay, so I've said a bunch of stuff. I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat, but I want to give people an opportunity to verbalize what it is, if there's anything on your mind, or you're like, what? Can you say that again? Because I know I'm saying things kind of fast. I sometimes talk too fast. So I just want to give anybody an opportunity to speak up before I move on. Checking for hands or see any hands. I don't see any hands. Oops. Okay. Oh, clicked. I didn't want to click yet. Oops. Okay. Well, I guess we're moving on. Unless there were any questions. Okay. I don't see anybody. Awesome. Yay. Okay. So how do you get there? How do you get to your thesis statement? So in a way, it's a bit of a linear process. You have your broad topic, you have your big, kind of umbrella. Then you need to narrow it down to a meaty research question that you can reasonably answer in the size of paper that you are writing. Okay, so that's an important point. It's a scope question again. So how many pages are you supposed to be writing for your assignment? Is it a 3-page paper? That's real short. Is it a 10-page paper? That's bigger. So again, it's that, what I was saying about the Goldilocks topic, the Goldilocks problem of coming up with a topic. If it's a 3-page paper, that needs to be a very tightly defined research question, subtopic of your paper or thesis statement. Versus if you're writing a 10-page paper, that has more space. You have more space to talk about stuff. You can talk about you want to talk about a bigger question, a bigger picture. As an example, if your broad topic was pay equity, which in another way, in other words, is people should be paid the same if they have the same level of skill and training. A narrower version of that topic is, pay equity for women, pay equity for female tech executives. So that's a very specifically defined, there is not only is that the field, the discipline, but also the gender. So pay equity for female tech executives. What a research question could look like is, how can the government close the pay gap between male and female tech executives? Because, it's no secret that women in tech positions make way less than men do. Actually, across the board in general, the averages are very kind of appalling. And so, if that is your research question that you're working with, then the complement to that, the thesis statement, where you're saying, okay, I'm going to start doing an argument. I'm going to argue in favor of some change. I am going to argue that Congress should create legislation requiring pay equity for female executives in the tech industry. So that is a policy-based argument that I'm trying to make, that, the United States government has a responsibility in fostering pay equity. And here's all the reasons why I think that's the case. And here's all the evidence that I'm going to bring to the table that argues this point. So, you know, it's like if you've ever watched a debate team debating something, like you are essentially creating an argument in every research paper that you write. Even sometimes when you're doing an informative paper, because there's often when you're in a composition class, you know, you do your informative paper, you do your persuasive paper, you know, like it's good to always have some kind of a persuasion in your mind as you're writing a college level assignment. You're not just going to be, you know, listing out stuff and saying, well, there's this, and then there's this, and then there's that. You always want to have some kind of an argument that you're trying to bring through the whole paper that says, you know, even if it's just like, hey, we have a lot to learn from, you know, a thesis statement for an informative paper could just be, there's a lot to learn from this, and I'm going to show you how through my paper. There's a lot to learn. So that is something that that is the argument that you're bringing through your paper. So that is one example. There are many different ways you can get here, and there's a lot of, I personally, like one of my favorite aspects of my job when I'm teaching is coming up with research questions, because there's so many cool things that we just don't know. And there's so many, like, the world is a fascinating place, and I am endlessly curious about what students think is important and what, you know, what people are passionate about. That's another piece of it. We sometimes will one of my colleagues teaches a workshop called What Do You Care About, which is essentially how do you develop a topic? And part of the advice of writing papers that I always give to students is pick something that you care about. Pick something that you're interested in, that you can get passionate about, because nobody wants to read a paper that you're not excited to have written. So, you know, being curious in your research as much as possible, I think is a good MO through college, because this is your opportunity to really dig in and find out cool, interesting stuff. Okay, Justin, I see that you raised your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
So my question is how does like writing like a research thesis differ from like writing like a thesis for like a literary class? Because I graduated last year and I took AP Lit, and like I have a very like kind of like chiseled way of like writing like a thesis statement in my mind. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify like how do these differ, or like how are they similar? Because like I'm kind of like having a hard time wrapping my head around this a little bit.
So I think with your literary, when you're writing like a literature kind of oriented paper, you're saying, you know, okay, there's common themes in this author's work. Here's the common themes. And you have your the format for a paper is typically introduction and the last sentence is your thesis statement. And then you have like body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3, and then your conclusion, right? That's like, you know, that's what I learned way back when. And I think what now stepping into college level writing, that is still true. That kind of the 5 points of writing your paper, but now you can kind of get a little more sophisticated in your process. So you still want to have an introduction. You still want to have a thesis statement near the end of your introduction. It doesn't have to be like the last sentence. But the part that I think that layer of sophistication that you then add is you want to think about how you are persuading your reader that this is an important thing. How you are making that argument, because you're always going to be making an argument. You're always, from here on out, like every paper, the expectation is that you're not just saying, you know, well, this is an example so, okay. I remember reading once a paper on how dogs in, I think it was like novels, Victorian novels. I think my sister wrote this paper way back when. Okay, like this is a long time, 20 years ago. But I thought it was really interesting because, you know, she had noticed that she was taking this English literature class, and she's like, "There's all these dogs in the books," and so she wrote something about this. And so the argument she was making is that, you know, dogs were an important part of Victorian, you know, English society because they kept showing up in all these novels. And so her argument you know, she's using these examples and she's listing them out and talking about them. But, you know, what is it that the dogs have to tell us about Victorian society? And she had some aspects of her argument, and, you know, okay, they're loyal, they're all these things that we all know dogs to be, but it, you know, you're just digging in and getting a little bit more sophisticated with the argument that you're trying to make across your entire paper. So I like the metaphor of, you know, you're a lawyer in a courtroom drama and you're trying to like present all this evidence, because I think that it really drives home that point that you're not just sort of spitting out a bunch of stuff on the page that you know, you are also trying to make a cohesive case for your thesis statement, for the thing that you're trying to argue in your paper. There's always an argument. There's always an argument there. And so you want to think about, you know, what is the point that you're trying to make? What is the nugget of and you may not have it figured out always. Like sometimes, you know, there were definitely times when I'm writing papers where I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to like work on the other stuff first and kind of work through some of my ideas. And then you can really tighten it up and get to the meat of it and say, okay, yeah, this is the good stuff. This is what I'm trying to say. But, you know, having that sense, having that guiding light of something like a research question, I think really helps shed light, even if you don't quite know what the answer is. When you start off, you're, you know, or even you do a little bit of background research first, and then you're like, okay, I think this is what I want to write about. And then you slide down into a rabbit hole and you're like, oh no, this is way more cool. Does that answer your question, Justin? Do you feel better about it?
Yeah, so kind of like coming into it, like asking yourself, like, why should I care? Is that kind of like a good mindset to have?
I think that's a good mindset to have. Why should I care? Why should my reader care? Like, what is it that you're trying to say? Because I've definitely read papers, I'm like, where is this going? Like, why would, you know, you always want to think about your like fictional grandma. Like your grandma wants to read your paper. What do you want to tell your grandma? Like, it's, you know, don't get too complicated. Don't get like beyond the level of what grandma can understand. Even if there's complicated jargon and you're talking about, you know, all this cool bioscience and grandma's like, I don't know what that means. You know, like you are communicating. By writing a paper, you are always communicating. And so making it clear and being able to do that little elevator pitch. Well, here's what I'm writing about. You know, it's that little succinct, clear piece of it. And this may be obvious. This is something that requires a lot of practice, which is why you're writing papers in every class. When you get to like upper division, if you're transferring out of DVC, like all of that, the more you practice, the easier it gets. But it takes a lot of practice. This is why, you know, I would write, when I was in graduate school, I wrote 4 or 5 papers in one class times 3 classes. I'm like, I'm writing lots and lots and lots of papers. So, you know, it is part of, you are all scholars in training, and this is part of your training. And so, you know, you're doing a great job. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here with me listening, because I think that, you know, just being open-minded and being curious about how to do better is always a good thing. So, okay. So the magic of turning a topic into a thesis statement. I'm gonna do some magic tricks. Here we go. First, and probably the most important thing, always narrow it down. So, you know, oh, I'm interested, or, oh, this class is about, you know, we're talking about social problems, and I feel like homelessness is a big social problem. Where are you going to focus? Are you going to focus in the state of California? Are you going to focus in the United States? Or are you talking about homelessness all across the world? That's huge. So having a nice, like really tight definition, even if you pull research sources from outside of that where or that when, you know, it really helps you to not have 10 billion research sources that you're trying to link together that say all these crazy things that are different. You're not trying to sort of tie it all together in a 5-page paper. You can say, no, actually, I'm going to focus on professional hockey players and, you know, in knee injuries in professional hockey players for my health sciences paper. So you really, like, making sure to, you know, you can start broad in your research, but I would not, I feel like a lot of students think that by narrowing it down too much, they won't find anything. And I think the opposite is actually true, because we have access to so much information these days that having savvy in moving down, like narrowing it down or then broadening it out. Like, you know, you don't know what's out there. So how are you going to know how narrow to define it? So being comfortable with the idea of like tightening it up, opening it back out again, like narrow it down, or that's too narrow. Okay, let's come back one step. So that is one of the key components to, you know, developing your topic, to developing your thesis, asking yourself these W questions. And, you know, it actually will make your research easier. And if you're like, I can't find anything and I know it's got to be there, ask your librarians, because we are expert researchers. We know how to find stuff. And so if you tell me, you know, I can't find anything on knee injuries and professional hockey players, I'm going to say, well, I know there's stuff. I know there's got to be stuff out there. Where have you been looking? And maybe that's the thing that's not that's not dialed in just right, is the places where you've been looking. So that we know where to look and what to look for, and also how to call it. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we bring to the table when we help you out. So plug for the library, ask your librarians. We are very helpful. It's our whole job. All right, so my second big tip for turning your topic into a thesis statement is you've got to take that arguable approach. So this is, again, you are now the star of your courtroom drama, the, you know, star prosecutor or defendant, defense counsel, whatever. So this becomes, you know, why or how, like, why is this important? How does this happen? What is the process? What should or should not be done about this issue, this social problem? So, you know, often our good arguable questions are related to some kind of a problem that needs solving. So, you know, what is the best solution? What is the right approach? Do we need to create a policy? Do we need to, you know, what can society do about this? Or what does the government need to do about this? You know, what do people need to care about? What do consumers need to do about it? So, you know, thinking about there's a lot of should and should not that happens when you are creating an argument. So using those words with care, and working that into your thesis is really always a good idea. I'm going to look at some examples. And I also want to clarify too that, like, just because it sometimes a question or sometimes a thesis might require research, but that doesn't make it a research paper. So there's sometimes, you know, I've seen research questions that, you know, they're definitely like, you need to look stuff up, but that doesn't make it something you can argue. So in these examples, like, okay, corals are an important part of the Great Barrier Reef. I call that not arguable because it's like, it's self-evident. The reef is made of coral. So of course they're an important part of it. You're not going to be able to disprove that ever. Or, you know, you're not going to, like, there's nowhere to go. It's like, of course they are. It's self-evident. They are an important part of the Great Barrier Reef. It's not, you know, you don't need to demonstrate why they're important. It's known that they are important. But instead, if you're writing a paper on the Great Barrier Reef, you need to think about something that is necessary, that might be optional. Tourism on the Great Barrier Reef could be optional someday because it's too hard on the corals to have people looking at them. So now it's closed and nobody's allowed to go look at them. And this is why that should happen. So that is something that you can argue, because that's not the case now. We don't actually know for sure whether tourism is or is not a good thing or a bad thing. You know, so looking at, when you're coming up with a thesis statement, thinking about things that are up for debate, things that we don't actually know yet, I think is a great way to think about this. That it's, you know, we as scholars and I include all of you in that group because you are scholars in training, you're in college and learning how to be a scholar. We are constantly testing the edges of what's known. And so sometimes it's like totally a given, like, of course, corals are an important part of Great Barrier Reef. We don't need to argue this. And so you need to find that edge of, well, what do we know? Or what are we not necessarily sure about? Or what's different now that I can kind of poke at the edge of the state of knowledge. And so by me writing my paper in this way and by framing it this way, I am actually pushing out the boundaries of what we know and the boundaries of knowledge. And that is true. Like I know most, when I was in college, this had never occurred to me, but what is known in the world is made by people like you. It's made by students and scholars and everybody. Like we are all participating in this great big conversation about what we know. And so every paper that you write, you have the opportunity to further the boundaries of what we know in the world. How cool is that? So that's why I'm like, write something that you about what you care about, because how cool is that you get to actually like push out the out into that like fuzzy universe of stuff that we don't actually know. You get to further that boundary. I know you don't feel like it because you're like, okay, well, my professor's gonna read 30 papers on this topic, so like I don't actually think I'm gonna make a big deal, make a difference. But this is your opportunity to push that boundary out. And so writing a good paper, writing a really good argument might do that. All right, so my other examples, I get all worked up. As you can probably tell, I'm a big nerd and I love knowledge and I love thesis statements and research questions, all that stuff. Yeah, so pollution is bad for the environment. I call this one not arguable because it's like, yeah, it is. We know this. This is not new knowledge. This is not new. We know this. We've agreed on this. We've agreed on this for decades. So let's legislate it. Let's try to reduce it. Let's do the best we can to fix it. But notice how in the arguable column, America's anti-pollution efforts should focus on manufacturing. So, this is me setting up my argument. The should is setting up the argument of, I'm going to show why manufacturing is an important focus because of all these reasons. And, it's not the consumer's fault. It's all these factories that we have that are dumping stuff and making all these problems and et cetera. So there's, these are pretty basic examples. They're not actually a paper I would really want to write, but I wanted to show how the difference between something where you don't have a lot of room to maneuver in your argument. There's nowhere to go because it's sort of obvious. Like, yeah, well, we know this already, versus coming up with a thesis statement where there is actually room for debate. Someone could say, well, the anti-pollution efforts should actually focus on consumers, not manufacturing, or it should focus on, restoring lost wetlands, or, what is the most important thing that we can do to reduce pollution. So there's a lot of room for debate in what's the most important thing. Gia, you have a question?
Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, I can't hear you if you're talking.
Can you hear me now?
Uh-oh, still can't. Let's see if I do this. Okay. Are you set? You're all good, Gia? I don't know if okay. You're also welcome to type up your question if that's easier. I don't know why the mic isn't working. Apologies that I cannot hear you. Okay. So I will make sure my chat is open. All right, and if you're able to type up your question, I will wait. But for the moment, because I think we are, much more do I have? Okay, I have a little bit more to go. So I'm gonna move on, but I'm gonna watch out for your question if you are able to type it up yet. Okay, so we're gonna do a little pop quiz. And I want everyone to open up their little chat window and change the send chat to me. I'm Catherine. Am I on your list? Yeah. So send chat to me privately because I kind of want to keep it just between you and me. I want to keep your answers just between you and me and not with everyone. Because I'm curious what you think when I present you a series of thesis statements. So what we're doing next is I'm going to show you a thesis statement, and I would like you to tell me, does this sound like a report where there's no argument happening? There's no new knowledge being presented. There's just like some facts. Or does this sound like a college level research paper where someone's creating an argument about something that should or should not happen, or something most important, etc. So we're going to do a little quizzy quiz, and I'm curious what you think. So is this a report or a research paper? This paper will show that dog owners should be held responsible in fatal dog attacks. Does this sound like a report, or does it sound like a research paper with a thesis, with an argument? Is an argument being presented here, or is this just a series of facts? All right, see. Awesome. Okay, get some. Okay, do I see your question now? I'm going to answer after we're done with the quiz part. So just hang tight and I will come back to your question. Okay, so I see some answers. I see a variety of answers. This is an argument. This is a research paper because the keyword here is should. Dog owners should be held responsible in fatal dog attacks. And I'm going to create an argument that says why. Because there's an alternative. Like right now, this is something that we don't have a consistent presentation, or we don't have a consistent approach in society. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's totally the dog owner's fault. And some people are like, no, it's the dog is the problem. And, oh, it's the breed, or, oh, it's the this or the that. We don't know the answer. We don't have a clear, established, this is what we do. This is how we approach this. There's this should happening. So this is going to this is setting up an argument here in favor of dog owners being responsible and should be put in jail, or should be financially responsible, etc. Contrasting with a related, this next one is on the same topic, but it's a different. This paper will discuss 3 notorious dog attacks in California. Is this a report, or is this a research paper with an argument? Clearly, yes, this is a report, because it's just presenting stuff. It's saying, here's 3 attacks. I'm going to talk about them. There isn't necessarily any argument there, because it's just, here they are. It's a presentation. There's no additional knowledge, or there's no original thought being put into it. You're just saying, here's these dog attacks, and this is what happened. So you can see the difference there, that there is the this thesis statement doesn't have any room to create an argument. There's no room to actually demonstrate anything or show your own original spin on the knowledge, what we know about dog attacks and how they're prosecuted and da da da. It just presents them 1, 2, 3. Okay. So is this a report, or is this a research paper? Is there an argument built into this thesis statement where you can see where this is going into an argument? This paper will prove that tuition for a bachelor's degree should be free for inmates in California. Okay, got a couple. I'm gonna wait one more minute to see stuff. Awesome. All right, I see The majority of folks are saying, yes, this is a research paper, this is an argument. And again, notice, keyword here is should and prove. Those are all very key, like argument-y kinds of words. I will demonstrate, I will prove, I will show, I will make, you know, when you're writing thesis statements, there's a lot of these like power words that come in. You know, the verb is something like demonstrate, prove, show, argue. You know, there's a lot of consistent, you can, if you're actually reading, you know, next time you read somebody else's, not a student, but a written, like published article. And when you get to the thesis, look at the verb they use and think about how that verb falls into this category of what I just called power words. So they're almost always like, when you start writing enough papers that you're reading other people's papers for the structure and the like, oh, I see what they did there with their argument. Oh, I see how they tied that back into their thesis statement. How cool is that? You know, you can start to see the mechanics of how it's done in a scholarly context, and not just like, I'm going to try to pull out the quotes I can use for my paper. So like thinking past the, you know, how do I use this in my own paper, but looking at that bigger picture of like, how did they build their argument? What are the points that they're making, and how does that fit back into their thesis? So it can be kind of a neat process. All right, so one last part of my pop quiz. Is this a report or a research paper? Probably pretty obvious by now. Maybe, we'll see. This paper will present several successful college programs conducted in California prisons. Yeah, report. Yay, consensus, yeah. Because again, it's presenting. It's not saying, it's not arguing anything should or should not be this way. There's nothing about policy. There's nothing about, you know, this is what should happen or should not happen. It's like, here's some programs. You know, not that that's not a good informative paper, like you can inform, but most, if not all, unless you are specifically being asked to write an informative paper, every paper you write at DVC and beyond should be an argumentative, persuasive. You are making a point here. You are trying to create this argument. Okay, so I'm going to revisit Gia's question. Okay, which is, I was wondering if you would recommend incorporating parts of a prompt into your thesis for a history paper. Yes, always. Address the prompt directly. So bring in the language that is used in the prompt into your thesis. So if it says, you know, the facts, the figures, the places, the things, the way that the prompt frames it, do your very best to use those words in your thesis so that it's really obvious to your instructor, like, A, I read the assignment and I understand it, and B, I am going to address those points in my paper. Because I've certainly written papers not on, you know, not in the greatest, which I did not get the greatest grades on, that were kind of next to the assignment. They weren't actually addressing the assignment. They were like vaguely related, but not actually addressed. Like I was not writing to the prompt. I was writing my own paper that I wanted to write, which was not, I did not get a good grade on, because you always want to write the paper that your instructor is asking you to write. And so part of that process happened when you read the prompt, understand the prompt, and actually write it, like literally write it into your paper. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like you're plagiarizing the prompt, but that's part of like that. You write it in, like put it in there. And that way, because that way you also are very clear that you're addressing the assignment in your paper. Yeah. And if you're not sure, you can always ask your instructor, like say, is this too close to the prompt, the language of the prompt? Am I going to get dinged for plagiarizing the prompt? And your instructor will probably say, no, you're doing it right. That's what I wanted. All right. So a little bit more in the time that we have left, or actually I'm going to just pause for a second and take questions because I want to make sure I don't railroad anybody or talk over people. If anybody wants to ask questions about prompts so far and reports versus research, I mean, it is something, like I said, it gets easier with practice. The more practice you can get in, the more papers you can write, the easier it gets, especially if, you know, you are in your composition classes right now, like, you know, maybe you're like, well, I don't even, you're still trying to wrap your head around all of these things. But that's also part of, you are a scholar in training. So you are on the path. You may not, you know, you're not a black belt yet. You're in the colors, you're a white belt or yellow, like you're working your way down the path of achievement to get there. So, all right. So these are some examples of different ways of framing a thesis statement. So if you're going to take a screenshot, take this screenshot, because I think this is probably the most useful thing, the most useful slide of different strategies you can make to different strategies you can use to create your thesis statement. And part of it is just like, it's different in the disciplines. It's, you know, if you're writing a literary criticism paper versus if you're writing a sociology paper or a bio paper, like there might be different strategies beyond this that make sense. But, you know, ways that you can make a thesis statement, craft that argument. One strategy is to challenge something that everybody takes for granted or assumes is to be true. You know, while many experts think that a four-year college education is something necessary for adult success, this should not be treated as given. So, you know, okay, you have experts everywhere that are going to argue this, but there's another side of that coin. And I'm going to make this whole other argument. You know, this is a really good strategy for when there's a lot of discussion on both sides of an issue and you want to focus on this side, but not this one. So you can say, you know, many people are going to say that this is true over here, but I'm going to argue the opposite. So, you know, this is because there's so many things that nobody agrees on, you know, all kinds of things related to like basically anything liberal versus conservative in politics could be argued this way, one side or the other side. You know, some people say this, some people say this, I'm gonna say this. Cause and effect is another way to frame up a thesis. So if we are not really clear on why this problem exists, you could say, well, I think that the cause is this. You do want to be really clear on your causality and make sure that there is clear evidence that the cause is actually possibly the cause. You know, that the effect is caused by the cause. You want to have evidence to back this up, because a frequent, what do they call it? Argumentative fallacy that people make is they misattribute cause and effect. So you want to make sure that your sources, if you're going to take this strategy, that your sources actually say, yes, B has caused A. A has caused B. So, you know, A is the problem. So make sure that you have that proper causality in your pocket. Claims about value is another one that I've definitely seen used quite a bit. So the key thing here, you know, the student debt crisis is one of the most serious problems facing the country today. So, you know, it is the most important thing. This is worth all our focus because, you know, or things like water pollution is the most important problem that we need to focus on. And here's all the reasons why, you know, in California, et cetera. So just anytime you're saying something like most serious, most important, that is this value-based argument that you're trying to create. And the final one, which I have also seen a lot, and because I come from an anthropology and sociology background, which talks a lot about problems and solutions and policies. So these are things, you know, this is that should based, you know, there's a lot of should theses in here. So what is the right solution? Well, we need to do this. We should, rather than assuming all students should go to four-year college, we should instead focus on a range of options for young adults, two-year college, technical school, and trade school as well. And this is important, and this is why, et cetera, et cetera. So these, I think, are, you know, four of several ways that you can create something that has that arguable position. But imagine, like, I think a trick you can use as you're coming up with your thesis statement, and it's in our Zoom world, it's actually a lot easier to access these things, or in our YouTube world too. If you've never watched a speech team debating something, if you've never actually watched how debaters create arguments, watch this process, because it's actually kind of neat to see how people can create an argument like on the fly. I was part of the debate team way back when I was in community college down in Southern California, went to Cuyamaca College. So I know, I've been in CC too. And I didn't do, I did the more theatrical events. I didn't ever do debate because I couldn't do this process. Like, I didn't understand how to create arguments it was this magic process to me. I was very astonished to watch this, but I think it can help you figure out like what an argument sounds like, because this is what we talk about when we talk about rhetoric. It's the creation of an argument that you then see through and add evidence to, and connect all the dots together. And so if you are able to watch the process happening as other people are presenting things, and with speech, it's a little bit easier because it's shorter. It's not like buried in a lot of text and writing and reading. But if you're listening to people say stuff, then it's by necessity a little bit shorter and more concise. So it can be really interesting to observe this process happening. Or I would not advise watching like presidential debates, because they're not actually debates. They're other things. They're like sound bites, and but you're reading an op-ed piece in the paper. Somebody has an opinion piece, and you can sort of watch that persuasion happening as it's happening for you. And you're like, oh yeah, that's a really good point. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. And you can watch yourself being persuaded. So again, like if you can step out of if you can step into the kind of meta verse a little bit and watch the process as it's happening when you're reading something, or when you're reading a scientific paper or a sociological paper or something, whatever you're reading next, whatever your assignment that you're working on right now, like it's actually pretty fascinating to then see it happening and go, oh, that's how look, and they're tying it back to the thesis. How cool is that?
Hi, Catherine. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
I know, are we out of time?
We are. We only have 1 minute, but I just wanted to call attention to the chat for any of you who happen to be here and need to receive extra credit for your attendance today. Please complete the survey in the chat. I see that only 2 students have completed thus far, so that's pretty important, and please complete that, and the link is in the chat.
Awesome. And I'm so glad I'm on my last slide. So yeah, if you need more help, your DBC librarians, like my job is helping students. That's what I get paid by the college to do when I'm sitting at my desk in the library or online. Like I'm also chatting with students on my computer or texting them or what have you. If you also need help, we're not often doing thesis statements. That's usually something that's done by the writing tutors, but I would certainly help you with your thesis statement if you ask me when I'm on duty in the library. We do research appointments, which can be really helpful if you're not sure you understand your prompt, or you're like, I don't even know where to start for my research paper. The research appointments are done. We've been conducting them over Zoom, but you can also come into the library and just meet with me face to face too. And I will happily do a research appointment with you, at my desk on the spot, and all my colleagues are the same. So, we have lots of resources available for helping, and, we love research, love research papers. I always love hearing what students are working on. So please come in. My job is helping students. I want to see you. I want to help you with your research and help you be successful at DBC. So, yeah, I'm happy to stay on a little bit later. Thank you for staying with me this time. I appreciate everybody making the time. Fill out the survey if you need extra credit. And I look forward to seeing y'all in the library. we're open till 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And I work Mondays, so you can come see me. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you for your time.
Of course.